Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, all around changing perspectives on diversity. It's great to see so many of you here today. We are expecting the webinar to last an hour, and we're going to send through a recording afterwards for you to share internally or externally or wherever you want, really. If you've got any questions as we go, please add them in the Q&A box. We will, of course, try and answer them as we're going through the webinar, but if not, we've got a Q&A section at the end and we'll leave it for that. As always, Frankie's going to send around a feedback form, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to fill that out. It's so helpful for us in informing the content that we put together in the future, and then also helping us to get better at running these webinars for you. So with that said, we are lucky enough to be joined today by 3 expert speakers, and they're all covering their own specialist area of diversity. So we've got Resham Kotecha, who is the head of engagement at Women to Win and a trustee of the Fawcett Society. Resham's going to be speaking about what we can do to re-examine our understanding of leadership and to help promote women in senior positions. We've got Meera Raikundalia, who's one of the founders of the Black Young Professionals Network. That's a business dedicated to connecting Black professionals to each other and to businesses around the world. Meera is going to be talking through how companies can broaden their talent pool, get everyone on board with diversity strategies, as well as the dangers of the term BAME. Bob Fahey is a partner at VWV, which is a leading UK law firm. He's going to be taking us through a presentation on the law around diversity, and specifically on the distinction between positive action and positive discrimination. There's going to be an opportunity to ask Bob questions, so please do store them up as we go and ask any questions that have been on your mind or that you've been worrying about over the past years and months. All of the talks should take around 10 minutes, and as always, we've encouraged all of our panelists to focus on actionable insights. So we hope that you all leave today ready to implement changes immediately within your organizations. But I'm going to get us started by introducing Instant Impact and also running through how to approach 2 of the most common challenges that we encounter in our line of work on implementing diversity strategies with our clients. So for those of you who don't yet know us, we're internal recruitment specialists, and we help with our clients to build the internal recruitment function that they need and to reliably bring in the right talent into the organizations and to successfully execute recruitment strategies that range from how to recruit remotely to how to improve diversity. And we provide the team, the technology, and the expertise to do that. Now, clearly, diversity's come into sharper focus this year for many leadership teams, and we're keen to take advantage of that momentum and do as much as we can to enable every business, regardless of its size or location, to affect change within their organizations. So that's why we're running this series of webinars, and it's also why we've shared all of our methodology and resources that we have on our Diversity Hub. Frankie is going to circulate a link now. Please do sign up. It's completely free. All we ask is that you give us feedback on what you've found useful, what you didn't find useful, and importantly, what content you'd like to see in the future. So since the start of the year, we've spoken to hundreds of businesses about their diversity strategies and the challenges that they have in implementing them. And one of the challenges that we come across probably, well, as much as any other, but one of the most, is that whilst the vast majority of business leaders say that they want to promote diversity within an organization, when it comes to making process change or putting money behind initiatives, they can be less forthcoming. On the 16th of September, we're going to be running a full webinar on this topic, all around building a business case for diversity. And we've also, if you have a look around our Diversity Hub, we've got a module on there that might be, that will be helpful for this kind of thought process, which is how to establish the necessary mindset shift within an organization. But in the meantime, I thought it might be useful to go over a few key stats to help you get those really important conversations started with the people that hold the decision-making power and ultimately the purse strings. The most compelling resource that I've found on the topic is McKinsey's report that they wrote a couple of years ago called Diversity Matters. They compared the performance of large companies in the UK, the US, Canada, and Latin America, and they compared that performance to their diversity, which was measured by the share of women and ethnic minorities in leadership positions. McKinsey found a statistically significant relationship between the diversity of leadership and better financial performance. So the more diverse an organization's leadership, the better it performs. Companies in the top quartile of ethnic diversity were 35% more likely to have financial returns above the national industry median. And companies in the UK with a 10% higher gender and ethnic diversity in management had EBIT or profit that was 5.8% higher than average. Now, why is this? Because companies that are more diverse are able to attract and win top talent. They're able to understand their customers better, win more business, and make better decisions. And one of the things I found particularly interesting from the report is that it's the UK where this difference and this competitive advantage that diverse companies have is most pronounced. Now, if those stats don't do the job, I don't know what will. There is a direct correlation between how diverse a business is and how well they do financially. So as I said, our webinar on the 16th of September will go further into the business case for diversity. We're also going to be looking at the metrics that you can use to track success in the long term. So I hope you can make it. The second challenge that we often encounter is a really important one to bear in mind today, especially for Resham and Mira's talks. And the symptoms that we see from this challenge are failed diversity strategies and also telltale comments that sound like, oh, well, you know, we've tried everything, but our industry is so bad for diversity, there's not a lot we can do. Or, oh, I really don't understand, we attract diverse candidates, but they never seem to be successful in the hiring process. So if that's what you're seeing and hearing in your own business, it may well be that you've underestimated just how complex diversity can be. So to really achieve improvement, most businesses, or a lot of businesses, need a holistic transformation program. If we just look at the recruitment process alone, there are dozens of areas where high quality, diverse candidates can be disadvantaged. And if you haven't got one of these areas right, it makes it more likely that you'll be unsuccessful at driving diversity and that some of those really high quality candidates won't be recognized. I won't go into all of the details because I know Mira and Resham are going to be looking at the very definition of talent and what a good hire looks like within an organization. But for example, if you have a look at the job description, the tighter the requirements and the more specific the requirements on the job description, the shallower and often the less diverse the talent pool. So to take an advantage, if you look at the university, if you specify what university you want your candidates to come from, let's say you say Oxford and Cambridge, only 3.1% at Oxford and 3.4% of students at Cambridge are Black, compared to 8% in the broader UK university population as a whole. So you see how big an effect that can have. Language on job descriptions can also affect the number of applications that you get from women and ethnic minority groups. So can your business's employer brand. And as we've talked about on other webinars, the assessment process that you have in your organization needs to be designed carefully and professionally to help avoid cognitive bias. So to see real sustained change, everyone and everything in the recruitment process needs to be aligned, from the junior recruiter who's screening the early applications or posting and writing the job descriptions, all the way through to the hiring manager, whether they're a director, head of department, or CEO of the organization. So today, we're going to be hearing about what businesses can do to redefine talent and re-examine their recruitment practices. And every step in the right direction is a really important one. But please do remember that none of these changes can exist in isolation. In most cases, they have to be part of a bigger program of change and a bigger focus on diversity and, of course, inclusion once they've joined the organization. And there's a quote that I really like from a leadership coach over in the States called Marshall Goldsmith. He once said that leadership is a contact sport, and so, in my opinion, is improving diversity. So take the ideas from change that you hear today, or that you found on the internet, or on the Diversity Hub, hopefully as well, and be really active in implementing them. Don't be worried or scared about having those awkward conversations. And of course, once you've implemented those changes, make sure that you're following up as well. And change by change, step by step, we'll get there together to a more inclusive and more equal workplace. So that brings me nicely to our first speaker today, Resham Kotecha. Resham, as I mentioned, is Head of Engagement for Women to Win, which is an organization committed to encouraging female candidates to run for to be MPs. She ran herself in 2015 and 2017 as the Conservative Party's youngest ethnic minority candidate. And although she didn't win the seat, Resham did achieve the party's highest vote in the constituency for almost 40 years, which is a huge achievement in itself. Resham's also a trustee for the Fawcett Society, which is the UK's largest charity campaigning for gender equality and women's rights. And finally, Resham runs her own public speaking training agency, Podium Perfect, and there she's trained over 25 former and current MPs. So Resham, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. So, as Felix mentioned, Women to Win is an organisation that was set up in 2005 by Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, and Baroness Anne Jenkin. And the idea at the time was to try and find a way to encourage more women to stand for Parliament, because at the time only 9% of Conservative MPs were women. Now, some people say, why does it matter how many MPs are women? We should have the best person for the job. And that's the kind of rhetoric I hear, having worked as a strategy consultant as well. You know, the same thing again and again, it's the best person for the job. But the reality is we want the best person for the job, but often, as Felix mentioned with job descriptions, often recruitment processes are structured in such a way that they present either greater structural challenges for women or barriers that prevent women from coming forward. So it's not that you have an equal opportunity of becoming the candidate if you are a woman, because often there are things like networks and selection processes that work against you. Right now, 24% of Conservative Party MPs are women, up from 9% in 2005. And Women to Win actually doesn't do any work around all women shortlists, quotas, or positive discrimination. So that is, I think, a massive debate for another time. I know that's something the Labour Party does and has been very successful with. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the work we do and how we get more women to come forward. Studies show that female politicians are much more likely to concentrate on issues that affect women, whether that's reproductive rights, elderly care, children's welfare. And if you think about recent COVID decisions, men could get their beards trimmed nearly 6 weeks before women could have their facial hair dealt with. And there was no rhyme or reason for this other than the fact that there were just not enough women involved in decision making who very easily could have pointed out that this just didn't make sense. Studies have also shown that a higher proportion of women in government leads to a lower level of corruption in local and national level. And whilst we've taken massive steps forward as a country, the 2019 election meant that we've got the highest number of female MPs ever, but we're still only at 220 female MPs, and a total of 552 women have been elected to the House of Commons in the last century, which is less than one entire parliamentary sitting. So you can see that there's still a long way to go. So how do you assess the issue? How do you challenge socially accepted views that men are better in leadership positions? Well, the first thing to do is to assess what the barriers are, and sometimes that question needs to be who the barriers are. And in order to become an MP, for people who don't know, you have to be selected by members of the party. So you have to recognise that the selectorate, the people doing the selectorate, tend to be older, whiter and more male. So there's a subconscious bias naturally there already, and that society and people's experiences have shown them that generally an MP, and you can substitute that for leader, looks like a white man in their 50s. So it's similar for C-suite executives, directors and senior leadership teams, that people expect subconsciously that a white man of a certain age is the right person to do the job. So how can you change this? So the first thing is to think about role models and what people are used to seeing. Because if people are used to seeing a certain thing, that is what their bias will take them to when they think about who is right for that role. A behavioural economist did several studies and found that if there was a photo of Margaret Thatcher in the room where candidate selections were taking place, members were much more likely to select a woman. Because normally associations keep up photos of former MPs, and so you see a long line of men, and all it takes is one photo of a woman to show you that actually the job can be done by a woman. So think about what your selectors, what your recruiters are seeing, what your leadership teams see just before they go into recruitment, and start thinking about the fact that a woman or someone from an ethnic minority background is right for the role, even if they look different. Then think about reframing the job. So I see a lot focused on reframing the job for applicants, but actually we also need to think about reframing the job for the recruiters. In politics, Women to Win made a video where we featured men from ethnic minority backgrounds and women MPs talking about the role and what they did. And just showing that video in advance of selection subconsciously triggered people to believe that their MPs didn't just have to be a white man, but actually the ethnic minority MPs did the role brilliantly, women did the role brilliantly, and it meant that they were much more open-minded about who they selected. Often with recruitment processes in politics and in business, you have a multi-stage approach where some people are responsible for stage 1, some for stage 2. And by the time you get through to the final rounds, you've got people involved who haven't had anything to do with the recruitment process until that point. So even explaining to people how the final candidates got there can be really valuable. In politics, it's very common to have a final of just men. It's happened for decades, for centuries. So when you have 3 or 4 men in the final of a selection process, no one questions whether that's the best people for the job. No one questions whether that's a result of quotas or positive discrimination. However, if you end up with more than one woman in your final round, often the question is, are they the token candidate? Is this positive discrimination? Is this a quota? Are they the best person for the job? So simply explaining to people how you got to that final shortlist can help them to understand that there are real genuine reasons for that rather than a tokenistic exercise. In politics and in business, we know that women need to be asked more than once. In politics, a lot of men seem to grow up knowing that they're destined to become Prime Minister, and that is very, very rare amongst women. Studies show that actually women have to be asked 3 times to consider standing for Parliament before they'll actually put themselves forward as a candidate. And so it's about tapping women on the shoulder. If you see good women who have potential, tap them on the shoulder and prime them for a future leadership role. They might not be ready for it now, but if they've started thinking about it, if they've started down that path of considering that leadership role, then it's much more likely that in the future, when they're asked a second and third time, that they will consider putting themselves forward for it. And some of that involves outreach. We talk about the pipeline in politics a lot. It's all very well saying we want more MPs at the end of it, but if we don't have enough women coming forward to be candidates, we're not going to get them coming out the other end as MPs. So it's about the outreach. Are you thinking about going to careers fairs? You might not want to recruit graduates, but you want people to be aware of your company or the industry so that a few years down the line, they might come back to you. When I went to careers fairs in banking and consultancy at university, I remember seeing an entire room full of Caucasian men. And that made me think, and I like to think I'm a pretty confident person, that kind of made me think, is finance, is consulting a place for me when no one in this room looks like me? So be a little bit thoughtful about who you're sending as your representative and what you're showing on your website or on your recruitment. I worked as a strategy consultant. I was the only woman on the strategy team, and I was the only person who was visibly from an ethnic minority for a certain amount of time. And we had people coming in for recruitment who were ethnic minority or women, and they said that it was only when they saw me in the office that they thought this could be a place where they might fit in. Prepare women for the role as well. We do a lot of mentoring and training because currently selection processes focus on public speaking, and we know scientifically that women have higher voices, take up less space, and demonstrate perceivably, not actually, less gravitas from an audience perspective than men. So it's about thinking how to work around the barriers and to make sure that the women coming forward are able to tackle the barriers that you're unable to remove for them so that you really can end up with the best person for the job. It's about framing the issue differently, and in my experience, simply telling your selectorate that they are not modernized in their thinking in terms of progression only makes them more defensive. So we've had to work around it. We've had to get male MPs who aren't usually supportive of equality to think about their daughters and whether they think their daughters would have an equal chance to become MPs as their sons. And the more you can work around different viewpoints, the more you can have a multi-pronged approach, the easier it gets. And then the final thing I'll say in the time I have is that the Fawcett Society has done a lot of work. So it's the leading gender equality charity in the UK. And they've done a huge amount of work on the impact of COVID from a gender perspective, how much it affects women compared to men. And what I would say is be particularly aware and sensitive of the fact that childcare responsibilities, homeschooling has fallen proportionately much more on the women than on men. And so women have suffered a larger fall in earnings, are losing their jobs in greater numbers, and are probably going to find it harder to break down some of those barriers in terms of diversity recruitment when they go forward for jobs. So do have a look at the work they've done. It's quite eye-opening in terms of women's abilities to actually put themselves forward for leadership roles. And that's where some of these solutions around reframing the recruitment to the recruiters, and by recruiters I mean the SLT, could be particularly valuable. So thank you very much, and if anyone watching this webinar knows anyone who would make a great MP or wants to stand for Parliament themselves, please do get in touch, because we need great people coming forward. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks so much, Resham, but I'm not going to let you go away just yet, because we had a really interesting talk. It's amazing how many amazing, potentially not surprising, that the same problems that we see in the business world are faced in the world of politics as well. But we had a question in from Savita, who said, I agree that we need to ensure that people see those who are different, but that puts pressure on the very few who are currently in those positions, those sort of leadership roles. What advice do you have for those few? Being the only woman or BAME in the room is still very much a reality in senior teams, and that can result in added pressure.
You're absolutely right, and it doesn't seem fair to put that pressure on the few women or the few ethnic minority people in senior roles. I think it's twofold. I think it's where people are happy to, so politicians in particular tend to be quite happy to have the limelight and to be on TV, so it's about making sure you push people forward if they're happy to. But also the majority, you know, if you're a white man of a certain age, it's perfectly possible for you to be that ally and to be supportive by highlighting the work of a woman or of an ethnic minority member of your leadership team. And I think often that's the gap that's missed, that we don't see enough people coming forward talking about the issues that are affecting women or are that challenging women, and the burden should not be on the woman or the ethnic minority person to fight for more of their community to come forward. So at Women to Win, we always have a co-chair who's a man. We have a lot of male MPs supporting, because our view is this isn't a woman's problem, this is society's problem. And so we've always had male allies stepping forward to really fight for that cause and argue that this is important for these reasons. So I think it's twofold, that it's for the people who are being blocked out at the moment to break down the ceiling and extend the ladder to the next generation, but also for the people in positions of privilege to fight to extend that.
Well, thank you very much. So I will now let you end. Thank you. It's such a good talk. But Mira is going to be speaking next. Mira is co-founder and head of partnerships at BYP Network. And Mira has been working in the corporate D&I space for over 5 years and has helped grow and scale communities for women in technology. Mira has also worked in inner city London schools to connect less privileged students with opportunities in technology. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mira, and over to you.
Thank you, Felix. I'm just going to share my screen quickly because I have a presentation. So
sorry, that is my fault. I was supposed to stop sharing sooner, but I forgot.
No worries. Can you see it all right? Is it all good?
Yeah.
Great. 2 seconds. Let me. Great. Okay, so hi everyone. So my name is Mira and I am the co-founder and head of partnerships at BYP Network. So just to tell you a little bit more about BYP. So we are the largest network of Black professionals in the UK. We currently have 40,000 members, and we recently did a historical crowdfund to get our community to invest in BYP. Where we had a target of £500,000 and we managed to raise £850,000 to help really grow the network to become a global platform. BYP Network exists to change the Black narrative, and we do this by improving representation of Black professionals across all levels of business. Before I start to do my talks, usually, I like to address the elephant in the room. People usually ask me, and I'm guessing a lot of you are thinking, I'm not Black. I'm actually from a South Asian, Indian background. And I normally get asked, why have you kind of dedicated your life to kind of pushing for this cause? And quite rightly so, for a very long time, as a South Asian co-founder of a Black movement, I always rightly took the back seat when publicly speaking about the work I do. I understand that my background has meant some limitations and prejudices have been hurled my way, but to me, this is not nearly the same of a Black person. And I've always said, it's not my space. But the events that have unfolded over the last couple of months with, the Black Lives Matter movement, the killing of George Floyd, has really kind of got me to open up and speak very publicly about my allyship. So in terms of who I am, so I was brought up in Kenya and in North London. And when I was in Kenya, obviously, I grew up a lot around, Black people, moved over to the UK. My school was 40% Black in North London. And then when I moved to university, it almost dropped to like 2% or 3%. And then my experience in the workplace was pretty much never seeing any Black people. Soon after I graduated uni, I fell very much into, the gender diversity space, as Felix mentioned. So I would help grow and scale communities for women in tech, and then connect them to large corporations, like similarly to what I did similar to what I do for BYP Network. But often found there was a lack of conversation around intersectionality, and then in particular race. And then when you look even deeper into that, a lack of conversation around Black representation and Black talent. So essentially, BYP Network started in 2016 off the back of the Black Lives Matter movement then. And my co-founder, Kike, who is a formidable woman, I'm sure you've seen her around, she's been all over the news and media. She was working in banking and in fintech at the time. And often realized that she happened to be the only Black person in the room, and there certainly wasn't that representation at senior leadership. But Kike is a professional athlete. She's a stellar student. She's a scholar. So it was almost as if you had to be 10 times better to get the same opportunities as a Black woman. But she saw that in the community, the talent did exist, but a lot of her friends were either like unemployed, working in retail. So there's this huge disparity between the community and the talent and the perception in the Black in corporations. So BYP Network very much started as a reaction to that. It was, how do we connect professionals to each other, improve that role model visibility within the Black community, and then start your own kind of opportunities, find your own opportunities that way. It snowballed into this huge leadership conference we had last year with nearly 1,000 Black professionals and 50 senior leaders, and now a global network of 40,000 professionals. I personally have, our ambition is to work with pretty much every organization around the world and change the dynamics of Black professionals in the workplace. And we've worked with, nearly 100 companies in some capacity, including Facebook, Google, Netflix, PwC, and a whole range of other organizations. The ultimate aim for BYP Network is that we shouldn't have to exist in 10 years' time. And that's what we're trying to solve. Before I go into I want to talk about something that was really big for me, which was really educating myself around this topic back in 2012, 2013. And learning about race and the disparities within the UK specifically, and how that kind of attaches ourselves to our colonial history. But more than that, I want to talk about how these statistics kind of affect you guys as HR leaders. And I want to share some stats with you just to kind of make that clear. So the first one is, and this is something that we're always trying to tackle, is Black and minority ethnic professionals BME professionals have to apply for 80% more roles than their white counterparts to get the same opportunities. Another one is a Guardian survey found that 43% of those from a minority ethnic background have been overlooked for a work promotion in a way that felt unfair in the last 5 years. this is more than twice the same amount as white people who reported the same experience. Thirdly, this is in terms of the kind of pay gap that needs to be reported. I think more legally, it needs to be kind of something that's reported with every organization, but we can find that employees in the UK lose out on £32 billion a year for doing the same job as their white counterparts. This kind of echoes some of the stuff with the gender pay gap as well. And then obviously kind of like the positivity, there was Felix talked about the McKinsey report. There was a very recent one that came out that actually said management teams with ethnic diversity financially outperform their peers by 36% versus 25% for gender diversity. So what we can see here is it seems like everything is kind of, it's been stacked against minorities, but it's quite obvious as to the benefits of having more minority representation in business. Felix spoke about all the benefits, so I don't need to go into that. When talking about your workplace needs to represent the people and the communities that you're serving. Better product innovation. One example was a client of mine, Groupon. We were speaking about improving their representation of Black professionals within all levels, and they mentioned that in their product teams and their sales teams, they actually didn't have any Black women, and they hired a Black woman and realized that they were missing out on this entire market that was Black hair products that Groupon never focused on. And it was only when they hired Black women that they realized that this is a huge billion-dollar industry that they've just not looked at. So essentially what it was is hiring more people of different minorities, different backgrounds, different ethnicities means that you're improving your product capabilities. And this is why you have statistics such as management teams with ethnic diversity financially perform other organizations and their peers. So this is not just something that is good to do, but it's also something that we need to do. And in the last couple of months, since everything that's been going on with George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, I have never been busier. These eye bags are sleepless nights of, hundreds of organizations reaching out to be like, how can we kind of improve that representation? And obviously this is something we've been talking about since 2016, and we've already worked with organizations pre all of this. But one thing I can say that's been really super positive is action. Like companies are here, it's not just about gender anymore. It's about all the diversity. And it's like understanding that how do you authentically reach out to a community that, to improve your diversity numbers? How do you I've spoken to nearly 200 companies in the last kind of 2 months to help them come up and implement that strategy, which is, how do you, and how do you increase your targets for representation and so on and so forth. So what I kind of want to talk about is really simply, and I think, happy to answer questions afterwards as well, is my kind of summary on the points of action that need to be taken in order to start thinking about really hiring diverse talent, but specifically when it comes to Black talent. Because I think with diversity, you can't just have all diversities in one. You have to have very grassroots grown communities that you should target, because it just doesn't work. I've seen diversity job boards that have that accommodate for every single diversity, but it does how does someone in the LGBT community have the same experience, a disabled person have the same experience as I know there's intersectionality within those groups, but you need to have grassroots born and bred communities that you need to work with. So my first kind of point of action is to really shock your organization into action. And this is a personal experience for me. When I started reading about racial disparities and understanding race at work and looking at diversity numbers and figures and stats, I ended up dedicating my whole life into working to improve Black representation. I'm not saying everyone needs to do that, but when you read around it, it will really shock you into action. So I would say the first point is educate senior leadership, ensure everyone is on the same page. This is not just a topic for your heads of diversity. This is something that everyone needs to know, whether it's engaging with external partners to help run workshops, whether it's starting book clubs within your company, whether it's allowing your Black network to talk authentically, or your minority networks to talk authentically about their experiences. All of those things are super important, and it's that first step. Secondly, I'd say be very deliberate about sourcing. Go where diverse candidates congregate. Then eliminate your bias in the hiring process. So what this looks like is there are many kind of groups that exist for specific networks. There's an LGBT network. I know there's MyGWorks that do a really kind of good work around ensuring that there's a community for LGBT professionals. There's BYP network specifically for Black professionals. There's many women's networks, and so on. You need to be very deliberate with partnering with these organizations, but it's not just, oh, I'm going to partner with you, therefore all these people are going to come to me. It's, no, I'm going to partner with you to learn about how to attract people from these communities, and it's going to be very much a partnership where we're giving and taking. And then when you do manage to get diverse candidates, eliminate the bias by, you know, ensuring your hiring teams are on the same page, ensuring there's diverse people on hiring teams, removing blind CV sourcing, all of these different things, and being very like apparent and saying, okay, we're getting all these candidates, but they're actually not coming through as hires. What's happening here? Where can we change that? So every step it needs to be kind of audited at every step of the way. There's no point in doing all this if you don't have targets for race. Now, I know some big organizations, some really exciting big organizations, big banks, who are now targeting 9-10% minority, Black representation. Facebook have said by 2023 they want 50% of their global workforce to be from minority backgrounds, whether that's female, disability, veterans, Black, minority. So it's like, if you don't have these ambitious targets, it's just an act of kindness. And acts of kindness are great. They help individuals, but they don't actually systemically change your organization. It's really important to enhance your employer brand as an employer of choice to minority communities. So where's that role model visibility? If you have a senior leader within your organization who's a woman or a person of color or disabled or transgender, like how are they getting, publicly put them out there and showcase their stories and, you know, interview them, or, you know, as Resham said, like get allies to really publicize their work, because what's really important is people need to see people who look like themselves. So enhance their employer brand. If you're going to put out videos, diversity videos, don't just go to the same places. Go to those networks where these authentic, diverse candidates congregate, and push it out there. And then lastly, I think this is something that I've been trying to tackle and work with a lot of hiring managers about, which is rethinking the factors you screen for and increasing the parameters for what you think is a suitable candidate. So if your organization is notoriously homogenous, and it always has been, how are you going to find diverse candidates if you're looking for exactly the same experience that you've always been looking for? Essentially, what you're looking for is exactly everything that you have, but just a person of color or a woman. Well, you're then therefore just circulating the same candidates over and over again in the same industries. You're not actually improving the diversity within these organizations. And yes, you should. This shouldn't just happen for junior level. I think it needs to happen for senior level. So the media organizations are a perfect example. They're notoriously very white middle class, so they don't have people with that exact experience who aren't white. They have very few. So what can you look for that are, you know, transferable skills that you can retrain? Because the systems that have existed to allow for these people to get through in the first place are normally based on a white supremacy structure. So you have to really start rethinking. And in my opinion, hiring managers need to be on the same page as your heads of D&I. If that's not happening, it's all lip service. Your hiring managers need to know exactly why they need these diverse candidates as much as your head of D&I. Otherwise, the head of D&I is going to be pushing candidates and the hiring managers aren't going to be looking at them. So those are kind of my 5 points and 5 tips. I'm happy to answer any more questions. But if you do want to reach me, you can. So, you know, my email address is partnerships@bypnetwork.co.uk. Happy to work with the organization, happy to talk about how to improve and increase your employer brand for this community. And yeah, if you have any questions, please do let me know.
Oh, thank you so much, Mira. That was really very, very interesting. I think there are some questions that popped up, but in the interest of time, I will move on, because we have our final speaker today, Bob, who is an employment lawyer and partner at VWV, one of the UK's leading law firms. Bob's versed in all aspects of employment law and provides HR advice to employers all over the UK in a wide variety of sectors. And he's going to give us a presentation now, followed by the opportunity to ask any specific questions that you have around the employment law of diversity. So over to you, Bob.
Thanks, Felix. I'm just going to try and share my screen, see if that works. I think actually, Mira, you need to stop sharing yours first.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I was just trying to figure that out. I'm not very good at Zoom still. Only been 6 months. Sorry. It's not. There we go. Is that better?
No, let me quickly take over. I think I can do that. Oh, there we go. Right, you're up, Bob.
Okay. Great. Can you all see?
And we got it.
Okay, good. So thanks for the introduction, Felix. As Felix says, I'm a partner at VWV, specializing in employment law. I've been doing that for about 20 years now. Over those couple of decades, I've acted for a really diverse range of different kinds of employers, public, private, and third sector. Nowadays, my main area of specialism is higher education. So as a firm, VWV's is strong in the education sector generally. And my own personal area of interest is acting for universities in the UK, which is a fascinating area of employment and HR practice. I see we've got a few delegates from some of our university clients, so welcome to you. And I think they would back me up on it being an interesting world to practice HR in. So I'm here to talk to you today about positive action and positive discrimination in the context of what is permitted and what are the limits on what you can do to address underrepresentation issues in your workforce. So the question is in two parts, really. It's how far you can go to address underrepresentation generally and in your recruitment and promotion practices. And the reason for that is that's the way that the positive action rules are set out in the Equality Act. Before we get into the details of what that means, I'd just like to make 3 preliminary points. Firstly, positive action should really be thought of as an exception, a statutory exception to the general rules governing discrimination laws. So the general rule preventing employers from treating any group or individual member of a group with a protected characteristic less favorably because of that protected characteristic. But as I understand, most of you listening in are from the HR world. I won't go into great detail about the protected characteristics. You'll all know there's 10 of them. They include things like race, gender, religion and belief, disability, and so on. The second point about positive action is it's one of those areas where it's probably easier to describe the principles that apply than actually to get on with applying them in practice. So I will try and give you some practical steer, but when we get into the detail, you'll see what I mean. And the third point I wanted to make is that we have found, this is just anecdotal experience from myself and my colleagues, there are about 30 employment lawyers at VWV, and I talked to them about doing this presentation. And since the Equality Act came in 2010 and introduced the new positive action rules, amongst all of us, we can point to maybe a handful of situations where our clients have actually needed to ask us for advice about positive action issues. So I don't know if that's partially because of those practical risks, or it's because the employers that we are talking to don't have that yet at the forefront of their minds. Hopefully what that means, if it's the latter, is that this is a great opportunity, given the current world position and what's happening, to actually make use of tools that can actually help to increase diversity that are being underused at the moment. So getting into the bit of the detail, there's 2 kinds of positive action in the Equality Act. There's general positive action and positive action in recruitment and promotion. There is a degree of overlap between the 2. General positive action, as it shows on the slide, allows but doesn't oblige employers to deal with a situation where it reasonably thinks that persons who share a protected characteristic suffer a disadvantage connected to that characteristic, or have needs that are different from persons who don't share that characteristic, or participation in an activity by persons who share the protected characteristic is proportionately low. The employer in those situations is allowed to take any action which is proportionate means of achieving the aim of enabling or encouraging persons to overcome or minimize the disadvantage, or meet the need identified, or enable greater participation in the activity. So it's actually quite a broad area. And before the Equality Act came into force, really positive action in this context was limited to training and encouragement, whereas now any proportionate measure to address those three different kinds of disadvantage or underrepresentation is permitted. The key word here, of course, is proportionate. And again, those of you in the HR world will hopefully be well used to the ideas of proportionality in the discrimination world. What proportionate means in this context. So I just try and get to the next slide. What proportionate means in this context, it means balancing competing relevant factors, as is usually the case. So in the context of considering whether to take a particular kind of positive action, say to address underrepresentation, you would need to be balancing the downsides caused by the group who are not inside the group of protected people, or people with the relevant protected characteristics. So what disadvantages are caused to the people who you are not giving the extra help to, and then compare that with the degree of severity of underrepresentation or disadvantage that the group with the protected characteristic are suffering, and as always considering whether the action you're proposing is appropriate to achieve the legitimate aim, or are there other less impactful ways of helping that protected group without causing some equivalent disadvantage to others. And that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission Code, which I'm essentially quoting from here, talks about asking whether the appropriate action is reasonably necessary to achieve the aim, or would it be possible to achieve it by other means that are less likely to result in less favourable treatment of others. So what kind of things are we talking about? The EHRC code does give quite a wide range of examples, and they might include things like, for instance, if you do workplace surveys that indicates that you have a group of employees who are, say, in the age 60 and over bracket, and they are requesting more input from your IT support team than any other demographic age-wise in your workforce, you might put together some targeted IT training for that group to help them overcome the disadvantage that your statistics are indicating. Similarly, you might, for instance, provide prayer facilities so that certain religious groups are not deterred from joining your employment by the lack of those facilities. There's really an enormous range, provision of mentoring, provision, and this actually crosses over with a bit of what Mira was talking about, of advertising targeted in publications that are predominantly read by the underrepresented group, for instance. So there are actually quite a wide range of tools available to employers who wish to address diversity issues that would not, if addressed properly, land you in hot water with discrimination claims from people outside of the groups, because they would fall within that protection of positive action. And I've just given you a couple of other examples there. Again, these are taken directly from the EHRC code. I imagine you're probably all familiar with the EHRC code, but the Equalities and Human Rights Commission publishes statutory codes relating to employment, and employment tribunals are obliged to take those codes into account when relevant, when determining issues relating to discrimination. So their contents are not the full force of statutory law, but they're very important in the context of interpreting discrimination issues. So I won't run through the further examples I've given on that slide, but hopefully they give you some idea. Before I move on to positive action in the recruitment and promotion context, I just want to make the point that sometimes the phrase positive discrimination is used, and positive discrimination is essentially applying a broad policy of favouring a particular group with a protected characteristic, and it's unlawful because it won't meet the criteria of positive action of being proportionate and balanced in the approach. So broad brush policies that are applied over a long period of time are unlikely to be protected positive action. They're more likely to be unlawful positive discrimination. It's very important to be specific about the underrepresentation or disadvantage you're trying to address and the proportionality of the means that you use to address it. So finally, and I'm skipping through quite quickly because I'm conscious that we don't have quite as much time as we might have hoped. But positive action in recruitment and promotion, this is in section 159 of the Equality Act 2010. And it provides that where an employer reasonably believes that people with a shared protected characteristic are suffering from a particular disadvantage or are disproportionately underrepresented, it can treat them more favourably in recruitment or promotion as long as they are as qualified to be recruited as alternative candidates. The employer doesn't have a general policy of treating them more favourably, that's your unlawful positive discrimination. And taking the action, once again, is a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim. So that's that objective justification argument that hopefully should be familiar to you in the HR world. And this is where my comment earlier about it being easy to describe the principles, but quite hard to apply them in practice. What do we mean when we say that someone is as qualified, and how does this recruitment and promotion positive action work? The EHRC Code's supplement describes it in this way. It says this provision essentially allows positive action in recruitment and promotion in relation to a tiebreaker. It allows an employer faced with the making of a choice between two or more candidates who are of equal merit to take into consideration whether one is from a group that is disproportionately underrepresented or otherwise disadvantaged within the workforce, which is helpful to an extent, but what does equal merit mean in this context? And that is often, in practice, a difficult area to identify, because in reality, when you're interviewing candidates for a job, or when you're producing a short list of candidates to take through to interview, and the recruitment positive action doesn't just apply for the offer of a job, it applies in any stage of the recruitment process. But in any of those contexts, the reality is going to be that you will apply a mixture of measurable and scoreable criteria, but some degree of subjective analysis, which comes down to your view as to who is the person who will be best able to do the job that you need to fill. And again, going back to the EHRC Code and other commentary, the general principles are that equal merit doesn't mean an absolute tie on a score. You're not allowed, for instance, to set unrealistically low bars so that anyone who scores 7 out of 10 in a scoring matrix is deemed to be of equal merit, and then you select the person from with the relevant protected characteristic. But you are allowed, as long as you're basing it on some realistic evidence of the ability to do the job, you are allowed to take a broad subjective view that, for instance, you might have one person with 10 years experience in the role and another with less than that, but a higher level of say, postgraduate qualification that gives them extra academic ability, and weigh them up and say, looking at these two people, they both have equal merit in terms of their ability to do the role. So it's not necessarily an entirely prescriptive argument, and it is recognized that some degree of judgment is always going to need to be applied by the employer. I suspect that the main practical issue with all of this is that it's all very well for us to describe those principles, but when you're hiring someone, and let's just take an example, an organization that is underrepresented by women in its senior roles and is hiring for a senior role, and you generally view two candidates as being every bit as good as each other, one being a man, another being a woman, taking a decision to hire the woman because she's a woman will be at best counterintuitive for most people in the HR world. And you know, employment lawyers essentially, we're there as part of the risk management of an employer's setup, and you know, it will take an element of bravery for the employer to take a step, knowing that it's exposing itself to potential allegations of treating the man in that context less favorably because of his gender and relying on the positive action exception. But we are where we are in the world at the moment, where there are significant underrepresentations in relation to gender and in relation to nationality and race and other protected characteristics. And if these tools, which the law in the UK currently provides you, aren't utilised, then you're going to face an uphill struggle in addressing real diversity issues. So I hope that's helpful. It's a bit of a high-level run through the world of positive action. The final points I just want to make are that there are, again, other tools out there than the key positive action exceptions to discrimination. And they include the availability of information from your gender pay gap reporting in the context of underrepresentation of women, because that can lead you both into areas that you can target and provide you with the objective justification you need to show underrepresentation. But also policies in relation to matters such as annual leave, flexible working, paid family leave in the various types that it applies. The way that those policies are applied and the approach that your organisation takes to matters like that can remove significant obstacles to employment for women in particular in this context. But you do have to think about what your HR policies in general might be able to do to help you drive your diversity within the organisation. So that's it from me. I'll hand back to Felix now, and I am here if you want to ask any questions.
Thank you very much, Bob. That was really interesting, and I think some of the themes that actually came through from all of the different speakers today. So I find, again, from Resham's talk, how important having a thought about the individual recruiter's subconscious is in some of these decision makers. Again, came to the fore. And I think, Mira, you mentioned the blind CV screening. Resham, you mentioned how just reframing in their subconscious who and what makes a good leader, what a marked effect that can have at the end of the day. I found that really interesting. And I've got to say, Mira, I really liked the term shock into action. And I think that we're at such an interesting, almost unique inflection point after the killing of George Floyd, where businesses are shocked into action. There's a question on the list around what B2B businesses, how they can justify the business case. I'd say that the business case over the next couple of years hopefully is going to become much more urgent and write itself. We're already seeing diversity becoming a must-have in a lot of big companies' RFPs. We're already seeing employees coming out of school and university to really wanting to see a diverse organization. So the stats are all there, and if your leadership team aren't listening to them, and there's something else going on there. But I think companies will either be dragged along kicking and screaming, or they'll be the ones leading the charge, and I know which one I'd rather be. And Bob, I really like your term at the end there, bravery. I think that's exactly what we've all got to show over the next few years. It's always scary to change. It's always scary to take a step, and especially when you've got employment tribunals that could be an issue. But hey, if we're not going to do it, who is? So we ran slightly over today. So we were supposed to have the Q&A, which we will have if. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Time for a couple of questions. So I think we had one here from Madeline, who asked, how should we be thinking about tracking diversity in recruitment, given the very strict restrictions on what personal data we can request and store? I'm not sure who wants to put their hand up for that tricky question there.
I'll have a quick go. I mean, yes, data protection is always a potential obstacle for storing information, but of course, you're entitled to gather and amalgamate equal opportunities data for the purposes of diversity and inclusion. So as long as you're keeping it separate from your recruitment process and using it to track issues of diversity and equal opportunity, it can be done, and it can be done lawfully. You're going to be in a better position in a public sector organisation, ironically, than in the private sector because of the public sector equalities duty, which would be a lawful basis for processing, because you're processing the data to comply with the legal obligation. But even private sector employers should be able to separate and monitor equal opportunities data for the purpose of increasing diversity. Where people get it wrong is you have an amalgamation of the data with the information used for the recruitment process. And that's where you've got issues both with the processing of the personal data and potential discrimination matters.
Fantastic. And then Kelsey asked, oh no, I've lost the screen. Kelsey asked, in our organization, we've tried to do what I consider to be really basic things, such as ensuring that there are diverse shortlists, ethnic minority candidates, for example, for senior vacancies. And I've been told that this is on the cusp of positive discrimination. In your experience, have you seen diverse shortlists implemented successfully? So Mira, would you be able to take the well, legal if you can, but first run at it, and then Bob, if there were any positive action discrimination ones that you wanted to clarify, that would be great.
Yeah, I actually do shortlisting for senior level candidates. It's something that we've just started offering because we've actually noticed that companies ask for it. They've been saying, you know, we now know we've got an avenue for like younger professionals with your network, but we've also got like 10% of our network very senior leaders. So we've started doing some shortlisting of candidates, and it's been a challenge. Like, I think you're right, because as I mentioned in my presentation, as a head of D&I or head of talent, or you know, your incentives are to diversify applicant pipeline, but it's not the same for your hiring managers. So it's the importance is making sure that both are on the same page. So when you're talking to hiring managers, maybe they need to go through training to understand and shocking them into action to really get why these structural systems actually exist, and you know why it's more difficult for minorities to get positions, get senior level positions, and then thinking about expanding parameters. So really working out like what talent, what skills and experience are really necessary, and then making sure positive discrimination exists because you know for ages, like have technically like white men have been positively discriminated against. Yeah, probably. So it's like, this is just kind of counteracting it and leveling the playing field. So to me, it's an education piece. It's not just a D&I issue in the organization, it's a senior leadership and hiring managers issue. So it's very much, you have to like root it in my opinion. But we are really struggling with that as well. So yeah, we'll kind of let you know the updates as they go along.
Thanks. And Bob, just really quickly, is that shortlisting, is that something that you'd be comfortable with legally?
Yeah, what I would say is I agree with that description of on the cusp of positive discrimination. If done badly, a simple broad brush policy that we're going to have this many people on our shortlist who are from this protected characteristic does run the risk of I'll put it this way, not benefiting from the protection of the positive action regime. What you can do, of course, is be careful, first of all, to identify and evidence the underrepresentation that you're seeking to address. Show your thought process of what steps can we take to address that. And then if it's in the shortlisting context, really what you want to be talking about is scoring candidates objectively and then using the tie break in the shortlisting context and in the final selection, where in a way that you can then defend from any criticism. Just very quickly, I did say that we've only had a handful of requests for advice on positive action matters between us, and most of them have come from, let's say, white people or men or people who are, feel that they've been treated unfavorably on the grounds of their gender or race, and the client that we've been advising has been using the positive action to defend against those claims. So it's rare, it does happen, but if you get your processes right and approach the question in the right way, even though having a simple shortlist policy might not be possible, you can make use of the positive action in recruitment tiebreaker to assist and address underrepresentation.
Brilliant, thanks Bob. And guys, I think we are going to have to wrap up. Reshan, I'm sorry we weren't able to give you any questions at the end, but I know you've been answering them on the Q&A, and thanks so much for that. We will be sharing some contact details around from all of our panelists, and I just wanted to finish off by saying all of those talks were so interesting. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope to see you at one of our webinars in the future. Just to remind everyone, 16th of September, we're running one on the business case behind diversity and the metrics you can use to track it. We've got applied who are a fantastic technology partner of ours as a speaker there. We've also got the head of early careers from EY, James Gorfander, speaking, and I've seen him speak before. Really very talented speaker. So looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a fantastic afternoon.